You're perfectly audible.
Okay, so a very good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of AIIOBF. I'm Mehak, and let's start with today's session. The topic for today's session is caveats, limitations, and disclaimers. But before we start, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day, CA Ankit Goyal. Welcome, sir. So, sir, he's a practicing chartered accountant, a registered value under the category SFA, a founder partner of AAA Valuation Professionals LLP, which is an RVE recognized by IBBI for all three asset classes. And he's a founder partner of AAA Insolvency Professionals LLP. He has been a speaker in various sessions conducted by AIIOBF on topics like valuation of startups and use of CLVs. And he has performed his duties as a faculty in various RBOs, including AIIOBF. And today we invite him for the caveats, limitations, and disclaimers CEP webinar. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mehak. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So on this Saturday afternoon, when we have weekend curfews at many cities and maybe otherwise curfews in many cities as well, it is good to see a good audience. Looking forward to listen to this deliberation of mine. So I'm assuming that most of you are insolvent, are registered valuers, and that you might already be in valuation practice. I'm looking forward to have an interactive session with all of you. So please participate and please ask questions wherever you feel you can, you have any query, or wherever you feel you can contribute with anything, any specific instance or example at your end. So I've shared my screen. I hope all of you are able to see this. So before we go forward, what do you mean by caveats, limitations, and disclaimers? And if any of you have been using these, what are the standard caveats, limitations, or disclaimers that you use in your reports? Anyone? Anyone can participate and share what do they understand from this, and how are they using it in the current scenario. Maybe Kumar Jain can attempt an answer. Anuja ji, can you attempt an answer? You're muted, so maybe you can unmute yourself and then speak out. Yes, Anuja ji.
We write limitations like that the report is limited to the user. We can put the limitation with regard to the use of the report.
Very good. Anything else
we can
that
also
you normally put?
We can also put limitation with regard to to whom the departments to which it can be presented.
So that's basically limitation of use that you're talking about, where you can say that, okay, I am writing this report for this purpose or for this person, and you're limiting the use of the valuation report, right? That's one point that you're making. Any other limitations or caveat or any other instance where you feel that, yes, you should safeguard yourself or kind of give the disclaimer to the user of the report to be careful about using the valuation report? I've understood this one part.
So we can write regarding the information which we have collected. Maybe for example, like if we have collected it from management, so we can give that basis that whatever information has been stated here or calculation has been done, that is on the basis of information provided from the management or from any other source, reliable resource.
Mhm. So you
Also
can
sort
say that, so you're rightly saying that we have received the information from the management, and then you can always say that I have not audited this, right? I have not done an audit, I have not done an investigation verifying that information, I've trusted that information. So that's perfectly good. Anybody else who would like to contribute? Maybe Vishwesh ji can contribute any caveat, limitation, or disclaimer that you use in your report, sir?
In the case of legal title, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not always the case that, I mean, we would carry out evaluation, but I have not verified the legal titles or the or any kind of, say, in the case of land and building,
Mm-hmm.
I will only check, or I will only go through whatever licenses and uh, details given to me, but I have not verified the title, or I to keep yourself safe in that manner.
So you have not verified the title deed, maybe, right? That's what you want to try to say. But when you receive the title deed, and in case of a land and building valuation, you normally look for any encumbrances, any
Yes,
limitations for sale, right? That's what your title deed is for. One
yes,
is to verify ownership, and the other part is that you want to check on whether there are any limitations on the land.
limitations. Yes.
Okay, Sandeep Kumar Agarwal ji, anything from your end on this? Any inputs from your end on CLDs? You can unmute yourself and speak out, sir. Maybe Sandeep ji is not available. Okay, I will proceed forward, and I'm looking forward to active participation from all of you, even those who have your videos off. So we'll request you to participate actively in this webinar. It will be good for all the participants. So we will first look at, so we will concentrate on this guidelines issued by IBPI. These guidelines were issued in September 2020, on 1st September 2020 to be exact, and they have been in effect on all valuation reports which were finalized on or after 1st October 2020. So the guidelines issued by IBPI are structured in a manner that first they talk about caveats versus limitations versus disclaimers. They try to differentiate between these, but eventually they do say that yes, these are almost the same. General requirements from a valuation report is something that they talk about. Guidance on use of CLDs or caveats, limitations, and disclaimers which are not permitted to use as per the guidelines is what they cover. Then they talk about the commonly allowed CLDs for all asset classes and commonly allowed CLDs for specific asset classes. They do give a lot of examples throughout the circular that we're talking about. So the guidelines are called the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, Use of Caveats, Limitations and Disclaimers in Valuation Reports Guidelines 2020. As I said, these are effective from effective on all reports which have been finalized on or after 1st October 2020. And they derive their mandate, this circular or these guidelines derive their mandate from Rule 8 of the Companies Registered Valuers and Valuation Rules 2017. So if you look at these rules, you will feel that these Rule 8 is where all the requirements or the majority of the requirements from the valuation report of a valuer are listed down. And as part of what is required to be stated in the valuation report, the list of items also includes caveats, limitations, or disclaimers to the extent they explain or elucidate the limitations faced by the valuer, which shall not be for the purpose of limiting his responsibility for the valuation report or make the valuation unsuitable for the purpose for which the valuation was conducted. So when we look at this, we understand that that IBPI as a regulator allows valuers to use caveats, limitations, or disclaimers. So why do they allow us to use CLDs? Why shouldn't CLDs be banned altogether? What is the genuine use of caveats, limitations, or disclaimers in valuation reports? Would anyone like to try and answer that? Let's say you're doing an SFA valuation, securities or financial assets valuation. What is the genuine reason because of which you will say that, okay, I don't want to take responsibility of this. This is outside my scope of work. What can that be? Maybe Mr. Verma can contribute. Try and answer.
Actually, I have not done any evaluation reports, and I'm from plant and machinery. So
maybe you can give an example of plant and machinery where you think you will face a limitation in case you do a valuation, or you might have heard from other valuers.
Yes, sir. Suppose the case is that I go to the factory for inspection, and I ask for some information from the management, and they say that we may not provide this information to you. Then that case, we may write down it as limitation that this information, we are doing this evaluation limited to this condition.
Very rightly put, sir. So in case sir visits a factory and says that, okay, I need the date on which you capitalize this machinery, and the management is not able to provide it, or there is no management at all to provide such an information, maybe he will have to take some assumptions. He will have to assume that, okay, this is 20-year-old, 15-year-old,
Yes,
based
sir.
on some other evidence that he sees, whether that's physical evidence or otherwise.
Yes,
And
sir.
if later it is found out that no, there was some information available with somebody else, which led to the idea that no, it was not actually 15-year-old machinery, it was only 2 years old machinery.
Yes, sir.
Then the difference in value will be something that might come out. So you, sir, might like to disclaim that or put a disclaimer for that.
Right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the participation. Anyone else? Maybe Mr. Ankit Doshi can add. I don't know, sir, which asset class you are. Mr. Ankit. Yes, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir. Are there any examples of caveats, limitations, or disclosures that you have used, and what is the genuine need for these CLDs in a valuation report? That is what we were discussing.
Sorry, sir, I'm not that experienced regarding this right now.
Okay, okay, not a problem, sir. Maybe you can try and participate in another question that might come up. So going forward, the CLD circular is something where this was based on a committee constituted by IBBI to develop a standard template for disclaimers, because disclaimers, there was no prior to this this circular or this these guidelines. There was no guidance on what CLDs can be used and what cannot be used. So whenever there is no guidance, there is always chaos or some kind of I should say some kind of a misinformation on what can be used, what should be used, what should not be used. So when we talk about when we discuss all that, we understand that yes, this was required. Then this was put into place, as I said, on 1st September for effectively from 1st October 2020. And these are mandatory in nature. The mandatory nature idea comes from, although these are called guidelines, but these are mandatory guidelines. And this is something that all registered valuers must follow in their valuation reports. Quick facts and backgrounds. So section 59(7) of draft valuer bill, that is what is going to come in, also has a similar definition or requirement from valuation reports, that the valuation report should not dilute the should not have the potential or should not have disclaimers or conditions which has potential to dilute the responsibility of the valuer under the act. And it further goes on to say that they should be good enough to be admissible as expert evidence within the meaning of section 45 of Evidence Act 1872. So it is very, very important that we understand that even the new act or the draft valuer bill also gives a mandate that there should be a limitation on use of these CLDs. Anyone who can give an example of a CLD which will totally which will absolve of the complete responsibility of the valuer? Any example? Anyone who can try and answer that? Some example which you feel goes beyond what is required to be given, should be given ideally, which would say that no, this is not my responsibility at all. So if I say that I had been appointed as a valuer and I did not get enough time, and I have done this valuation for a fee of rupees 5,000 rupees, and I'm not responsible for this valuation. In case somebody suffers any loss because of my valuation report, I am not responsible. Who believes here that no, that kind of a limitation or that kind of a disclaimer is okay, that will do? And if not, then why not? Or if yes, then why yes? Why is it okay? Why is it not okay? Ashish, maybe you can try and answer.
Sir, I mean, this logic of being professionally busy is not right. Some laws and you should be professionally competent to carry on. You should not take out over extra work which you cannot handle.
So if somebody says that I need a valuation report in one day and you say that you feel that you can't do it, then you simply say no, right? You can't write in the report and say an excuse that, okay, I only got 1 day, so I couldn't do my job right. And when the fee was quoted, then you did participate in that fee. So you felt that, yes, my valuation report, which is trustworthy or which should be trustworthy, can be made in 1 day, right? Or for the fee that you got, that one got. So that's one part. Can I overall give a disclaimer that I'm not responsible for any action on my valuation report? Will that, like, how is that wrong? Or how is that okay?
So, sir, what can you repeat, sir?
Can I say that, okay, I am not responsible for any loss because of my report?
No, no, sir. No, sir.
Because my report is being asked for the only purpose of setting something, right? So if the bank is asking for my report and the bank is using my report to set up a reserve price, and later the bank finds out my reserve price that they fixed or at which they sold the asset was actually 1/3 or half of the actual market value. So then that's a problem, right? So that should not have happened. So similarly, we as valuers, if we are not accountable for whatever reports we are issuing, then what is the whole point of our reports, right? The idea is that somebody is basing their decision or making a decision based on our reports. If you're giving a report to an IP under IBC, then the whole COC is trusting your valuation report and perhaps sending a company into liquidation because they are not able to get a resolution plan which is more than what you have suggested the company will fetch in case it is liquidated, right? Some of you who have done IBC valuation will understand that if you do an IBC valuation and you find out a liquidation value and you later find out that no, that liquidation value is something which is not really realizable, then you actually suffer a big loss because you might have rejected a resolution plan which was worthy of being approved, right? So the structure, the guidelines are divided into 3 structures. The first part is need for caveats, limitations, and disclaimers. The second part is guidance note on how to use them. And the third part is called illustrative list of caveats. So need for caveats, limitations, and disclaimers. We've also already talked about Rule 8.3, where yes, the caveats have already been limited in clause L of these of the sub-rule 8.3. And we also have read about that it should be that the CLDs shall not be for the purpose of limiting the responsibility of the valuer for the valuation report. A limitation. So what is a limitation? A limitation arises if the RB is unable to obtain sufficient information and explanations considered necessary for the purpose of valuation. where such limitation results in RV being unable to carry out the evaluation in accordance with the normal approach to valuation, the evaluation report shall be modified with a paragraph setting out the nature of circumstances giving rise to the limitation. So the normal approach, wherever it is not possible, then a limitation is required to be stated. Coming to disclaimers. So disclaimer is required in the valuation report for what? A disclaimer can protect the rights of the RV by cautioning and dissuading others when using the contents. So the disclaimer limits the liability of RV since it serves both as a warning and a way to mitigate risk. And the disclaimers should understand the risk so anyone who reads the disclaimer should understand the risk involved in using the valuation report. That is the whole idea. So a valuation report should not carry a disclaimer which has the potential to dilute the responsibility of the RV or makes the valuation unsustainable for the purpose for which the valuation was conducted. The valuation report should be capable of being tested through crucible of legal evidence in judiciary proceedings. So the idea is that any valuation report that you make should ideally be justifiable, should ideally be defendable. So a registered valuer may identify the rights she wants to protect, identify the areas where she might be subject to liability, clarify that the contents of valuation report pertain to specific use by the company, caution the reader of the potential risk. However, the disclaimer by itself shall be able to exclude an RV's liability in respect of negligence in performance of his duty. So you can't say that I was negligent. Any example of negligence in duties that a valuer might be, where a valuer you think is negligent if he does not do that? Any example?
Exorbitant valuations made without any proof or.
So what is the negligence part there? Like, what has the valuer not done, which he was duty bound to do? That's the effect, that the valuation is high. But what is the negligence that might have caused the valuation to be high?
Probably would not have followed the proper methodologies which are required to be followed.
There might be an arithmetic error, right? Because of which he has valued something totally wrong. Maybe he has added 1 or 2 zeros to the valuation. So that's something that is negligence, right? And everyone agrees that that might be negligence. He has not studied the market rates properly in case he is following the market approach for evaluation. Is that negligence? Might be considered as negligence, right?
Yes.
A plant and machinery valuer who has simply done a valuation based on the book value of the plant and machinery without going into the present value or the market value of comparable machinery in today's time, or without understanding the obsolescence of technology in the valuation. Can I say that that's negligence, or is there any difference of opinion on that? There might be two answers to that. So anyone who would like to take that further, this example of a plant and machinery valuer, whether that plant and machinery valuer is negligent or not?
Definitely he is negligent if he's not studying the market properly and he's not going in detail.
Mm-hmm.
So if he's not doing all this, then he's definitely negligent.
Okay. So I would say that in case the plant and machinery valuer has enough information in his hand, in the sense that he is able to recognize what machinery it is. In case he has taken a call that this machine is usable, this machine is not in a condition which is so bad that the machine needs to be scrapped. And in that case, if the plant and machinery valuer does not go and check out that what is the current value or the present value of a new machinery in the market, then that's maybe negligence. But if the plant and machinery valuer finds out that there is no label on the machine, he's not able to understand that's a specialized machine which may not have any market comparable. Sometimes, plant and machinery valuers find customized machines in the factories of the places that they visit. So in case they don't have information which is enough for them to go to the market and check for comparables, then maybe they can find an alternative approach. Only in that case, in case there is not enough information for them to check market prices. Any other examples of negligence? Maybe we can go to land and building valuers. Any examples of negligence that maybe a land and building partner can do? Incorrect measurement, right? So in case he has valued he has not read the title deed properly, he has not read the measurement properly, he has not verified the, so maybe all our land and building valuers are here with me. Is it difficult today to measure the area of land with all the technology in place? Maybe it is not difficult in most circumstances, and you can actually calculate or compute the land area maybe to an extent of 5%, 5% lack of comfort with 95% comfort. Perhaps you can value the land and building the areas also with modern technology, whatever is allowed. My team kind of goes to Google Earth and calculates the land areas for larger land sizes. So in case that becomes the industry standard, then those who are not doing it kind of become negligent, right? SFA valuers, how can they be negligent with respect to valuation reports? Any examples from any SFA valuers amongst us?
Consideration of discount rates which are not in line with the market or any comparable business.
Yeah, so inaccurate computation of discount rate to the level that it is kind of seriously hampering the valuation that is coming out is of course something that is very important. That's a good input. Any other example? If I look into an industry which is a diminishing industry, and I say that no, this industry, the growth will happen at 50x every year for the next 3 years, maybe I'm negligent where I don't know the industry size. Maybe I'm not even aware of whether that industry is growing or declining in time, right? Those were so few examples. And going forward, we can say that, yes, these are the requirements from a valuation report. The contents of a valuation report is what they have listed down. Procedures involved in preparation of a valuation report, caveats, limitations, and disclaimers. All these are aspects that need to be considered during the preparation of a valuation report. So considering the interest of stakeholders and need for transparency and principles of good corporate governance, the undernoted matters should compulsorily be covered in the valuation report in a clear, unambiguous, and non-misleading manner, consistent with the need to maintain confidentiality. So background information of the asset being valued. What can be the background information of the asset being valued? Any examples somebody can give me?
Assets history, its
Sorry?
uses, and the history of the asset.
History of the asset.
Valued.
Just give me an example. Maybe you begin pick any asset and then say that what would be the background of that asset. What would be the background information of an asset that a value normally values? In case you are valuing the shares of a company, can you say that, okay, the company was incorporated on this date, the company is doing this business, the company has units at these many places, the company has historically done the following financial performance is the historical performance of the company in the past, right? So background information about the shares, about the asset, who holds them, what are you valuing? Are you valuing the valuation per share, or are you valuing doing the valuation for the purpose of identifying the 15% shares which are belonging to somebody else, right? So all that. Any other examples? I gave an SFA example. Any example for land and building, plant and machinery, background information of the asset?
In case of plant and machinery, it is important. We have to see the environment, atmosphere in which the machinery is used. For example, usually machinery are used in a normal temperature. But if we are given work of valuing any machinery that is used in another level of temperature, where the temperature, atmospheric temperature is not usual to other machinery. So that point is also important that we need to take.
So what you're saying is, what you're saying might be important in the valuation report to understand that yes, these are the working conditions of the machinery.
Yes,
But
yes.
maybe the background information of the assets can include this part, whether these assets were used, for how long, what is the normal life cycle of these kind of an asset, what is the normal economic life of an asset in plant and machinery. Maybe you can talk about all that. You can give that background information. You can tell about how old is the plant that you are valuing, what is the average age of machines there, and so on. Like you can talk about all that. Yes. Anyone else who would like to contribute for any other asset?
Yeah, in case of plant and machinery, we can add also like whether the machinery is an imported one, whether it's a newly bought, or like you said sometime back, some are customized machines. Whether those kind of machinery is there.
Yes, perfectly good. So you can also say that yes, there's a long list of machinery, and then you can also talk about what is the gross value of that machine in the books of accounts, what is the net value of those machines, what is the what is the depreciation that they charge every year, and all that. So you can kind of try and pick up the background information with respect to the plant and machinery, how the machines were being used, and for what purpose were they used for. All that is also important. Purpose of valuation and appointing authority. So I think everyone will understand this, and I don't think any doubts can come up on purpose of valuation and appointing authority. So how does the purpose change the valuation? Anyone who can answer that? Very simple question. Give me an example of how the purpose will change the valuation. Any example will do. Let's first check a land and building valuation. So you have a piece of land and you have a building constructed thereon. How will the purpose of valuation change the value? If the purpose is for the bank to auction that property in the market versus the purpose being somebody trying to take a new loan, how will the purpose change the valuation? Will the same property have different valuation when it is being used for to be mortgaged versus when it is sold off in the market, when it is to be sold off in the market? And why is there a difference?
So genuinely, why the purpose to change the valuation? The valuation should be done on a proper methodologies. Why the purpose should change the valuation?
Okay, I will answer that. Anyone else who believes that the purpose can change the valuation?
One point can be the example that you gave. If for example, if bank wants to do the valuation for auction, then they will require the market price, and I am new, so my points can be not perfect. And the other case, if the land is for new construction, then it could be for, sorry, not justified.
Okay, so I will give you an example. Let me try and give you two examples. One, I say that I want to do a valuation. I want to get a valuation done. I want to sell my property to my neighbor, and my neighbor has shown interest in valuing the property. Number one example. Number two example, I say that I want a valuation report from somebody to estimate that what will my property fetch if I want to properly market it. And then maybe I can say that it normally takes 6 months for a house to be sold in Delhi, like city. So I say that, okay, I will spend that 6 months and I want to sell off that car. That is my purpose. So will there be a change in valuation between these two scenarios? Can the valuation be different?
So the benefit to the neighbor, if it can add to the value to the property, then only, I mean, otherwise, if we are not going to take the benefit to the neighbor, then the valuation should be the same.
So if the objective of the evaluation is that I want to understand that how much should I ask my neighbor to pay to me to for this property, then the purpose is different, right? And for the purpose, you will include the synergies that might happen for the neighbor. But in case you want to sell it off in the market, will you add the synergies of the neighbor? Maybe no. Maybe just look at the market and say that, okay, what is the market price for this kind of a property in this area?
Yes.
So the purpose, change of purpose, change something. Then the second thing is that in case the purpose is changed to an extent that I said that in the second example, I said that the property is sold with adequate marketing, with proper marketing. And versus a scenario where the property is sold without any marketing on a as expeditiously as possible, without proper marketing, without proper timing for marketing. So in that scenario, can we say that the valuation can be different?
Yes, of course, liquidation value will definitely be lower than the fair market value, because if we don't have a proper time just to do publicity and doing all that, so in that case, if we are going to immediately sell the property, the rates will be lower, the value of the property will be lower.
Right. So why will it be lower? Because we are estimating that in case we don't spend adequate time or we don't incur adequate cost for marketing the property, then we may get very few buyers, and in that case there may not be enough competition for us to fetch the value that we want to fetch, right? That is the objective, that is the understanding that we have here. So this is basically some variants of how the purpose of valuation changes the valuation. So therefore, purpose of valuation and the appointing authority is required to be stated. Basis of value, premise of value, intended users of valuation, all these are important. These need to be stated. Anyone who can give me examples of basis of value? What are various bases of value? What do you mean by valuation base? So valuation base is basically how you are, how you have different valuations based on the purpose. So there is this market value concept. There's this fair value concept under IBC, which has a different definition. There's a liquidation value. There's a synergistic value. There's an investment value. All these values are stated in IVS also, and you can read them up to find out how they are different from each other. Premise of value. What are premises of value? Anyone who has heard of something called highest and best use? Can try and answer this. What are the different premises of value?
In the way it can be used in better way. Suppose it is residential, having potential of commercial uses, then its value will be different, I think.
So that's an interpretation that, sir, you have introduced, that highest and best use will be that in case the current use of a property is residential use, whereas the property is usable for commercial operations, then using the concept of highest and best use, you will say that no, my valuation is higher, right? Yes. So there can be a current use premise, there can be a highest and best use premise, there is a concept called orderly liquidation premise, and there is a concept of forced sale premise. So what changes between these concepts is that you're saying that you have you are assuming facts or hypothetical situation wherein you are able to realize a certain value from the said machine, assets.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, can you give one example from plant and machinery side for basis of value and premise of value?
Plant and machinery side for premise of value, saying, or like? What examples are you asking for?
Yes, sir. Example, sir. Both
Examples.
Both for basis and premise of value.
Okay. So in case we talk about a plant and machinery, and we say that you have a plant and machinery in the form of a fully set up coal-based power plant you have the turbines, you have everything in it.
Yes, sir.
So what are the ways of valuing it? When we talk about premise, we can say that, okay, we can assume a market value base, and we can say that, yes, we will go to the market and check what can the plant fetch. So where can you sell a 300 megawatt thermal power plant equipment today in the world? Maybe somebody can say that, no, this kind of equipment is sold in Africa because that's where all these thermal coal-based power plants still work. They're still economical there. They can't be run in India. Somebody can say, no, this plant, where is it located, and we will be able to run it as it is. Right? So current use versus highest and best use premises of value can be then considered based on what do you want to do with that plant and machinery.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Most plant and machineries are having very specific uses, right? There are very, very few machines which are multi-purpose machines, like maybe lathe machines. Lathe machines are also heavily customized at times. But anyways, they can be customized again. So they might have a market, genuine market in the industry.
Sir,
So this is one example. Basis of value, I can also talk about how I can differentiate synergistic value and market value for you. So in case I say that somebody has a factory of manufacturing steel tubes, and he wants to buy some other company's assets which are also into manufacturing steel tubes. Is there a synergy for that person? And what is the synergy? If yes, there is a synergy, then what is the synergy?
Both are manufacturing steel.
Both are manufacturing steel tubes, and maybe they already know what is the market price of these tubes. So market price of the plant and machinery manufacturing those tubes. So if they both know that, yes, we will get a new one for this much. So totally dependent on the negotiation power of the buyer and the seller, they will come at a price which is most probably lower than the price of a new machine, right?
Yes, sir.
And at the same time, in case there is some distress at the end of the seller, then you will find that, okay, because of the distress, somebody will be able to get the values lowered, right?
Yes, sir. Sir, is there any connection for in situ and ex situ valuation?
Yeah, in situ, ex situ is very, very important. In situ, ex situ has a very, very different way of valuing the plant and machinery. In case of in situ, you're saying that the machinery will remain where it is, and you're valuing it as it is on where it is basis. So you're kind of trying to say that this is the current use is the best use for these machines, and they will remain where they are. Whereas in an XC2 basis, you're saying that no, wherever these are located, these have to go out, right? So in that case, in case of XC2, you will have to budget in the costs that are associated with shifting those machines. What are the normal costs which are associated with shifting of machines?
Shifting of machine, uninstallation, installation, and transport charges.
Yeah, transportation, uninstalling, installing, creating of that many machines which are bigger machines require a civil foundation to be made for them to be installed. So those civil foundations are rarely transportable. You will have to make new ones wherever you're placing the plant next. So this is I think I think you've also already talked about transportation in that case. Recalibration, so you will have to ask somebody to recalibration is again a part of reinstalling those machines. So those machines might be requiring an overhaul because of the transport. Okay.
Yes, sir. Right, sir. Right.
So I'll move forward now. So identifying the RV and other experts involved in the valuation. So you don't only talk about the RV, you're also talking about other experts that have done the valuation with you. Disclosure of RV interest or conflict, date of appointment, valuation date, and date of report. Intended users of the evaluation. So all these are required to be part of contents of valuation report. Inspections and investigations undertaken, business interest, ownership interest, characteristics, nature and sources of information, significant assumptions, if any, procedures adopted in carrying out the valuation and valuation standards followed, restrictions on use of the report, major factors that were taken into account during valuation. Conclusion has to be separately shown or has to be should be there in the valuation report. Caveats, limitations, and disclaimers, of course, are there in the valuation report. So these are all contents of a valuation report that should be part of the valuation report. So I will just look at the chat box. Rajesh, you had put in a question. I'm not sure of the question. I'm not able to understand it. In the case of new product where we cannot have similar kind of product, then like I think this must be something to do with what I was saying at that point in time. So there are circumstances where perhaps somebody can ask you to value the asset in day or two, and then maybe you can deploy resources in such a manner that you will be able to get the valuation done. Yes, in most cases, the valuation report might, valuation work might take more days, not a problem. Physical verification of assets, there's a possibility the physical verification can be done within 2 days also, or within 1 day also. There's a possibility that physical verification is a barrier. So totally depends on that. So I will like to take a small break. So maybe we can come back at 4 o'clock and then take it forward. Okay.
Sure. लेट लो कोई फायदा नहीं है लेट लो हाँ 10 नहीं अभी 4 बजे से क्या तो लोड़ा खींच लो नहीं तो छोड़ लो थप्पड़ मार लो चरणों में सो चलेगी 1 घंटा हो जाएगी फॉरवर्ड वर्कशीट का क्या तो बुला तो जूम मीटिंग के लिए हाँ देख लो करो आराम से ले लो है क्या हाँ अभी चल रही है देखिए जाओ अरे अरे ले जाओ अरे ऑडियो
Yeah, so we discussed the various contents of a valuation report. Any doubts in these contents, anything which is part of this that you have any doubts on, please let me know. Moving further now, moving further, the guidance note from IBBI talks about how the principal procedures that are adopted by the valuer to complete the valuation report should be part of the valuation report and should be set out briefly in the report. And normally what these procedures are, normally these procedures can include review of past financials, review and analysis of financial projections, industry analysis, SWOT analysis, comparison with similar transactions, comparison with other similar listed companies, discussions with the management, review of principal agreements, documents, etc., site visit, maybe a desktop visit can also be done. Assumption made for internal condition, which must be stated, like in case of a desktop valuation, RV may state that the basis of the report is photographs and documents provided. Process of identification, did you identify yourself? Did you use the help of the client, or did the client himself do the physical verification, right? So coming to business interest and ownership characteristics, which Bhavna ji has asked for. The business interest is that what is the interest of the person who is getting the valuation done. So one idea is that I am valuing a company and its shares, and or rather the shares of a company, and I say that okay, when I do that, I find out that I want to value equity which belongs to somebody and he has 15% equity versus somebody who has 85% equity. So the 15% equity per share value might be very different from the 85% per share value, only because one of the two options gives me control over the asset, right? So the ownership characteristics can vary between the two based on this idea. I am getting some comments from Mr. Rao. Physical verification of plant and machinery is the responsibility of the valuer. Machine values are small but large in volume. It's possible to verify. In case discrepancies in physical verification are found, it is necessary to report. After valuation reports, machineries are sold. Who is responsible? Maybe you can speak out, sir. I'm not able to understand your question here. Maybe you can just clarify what is your question, sir.
No, my question is, there are any discrepancies found in physical verification? So the value, is it necessary to report? And after physical verification and after valuation report, if machines are being sold, who is responsible? Whether the valuer is responsible, or the promoter is responsible, or the RP is responsible?
I think you should. What documentation, sir, do you think that you will have to prove that the machineries were there when you did the physical verification? You will have some photos, you will have some videos.
No, but how many photos we can take if it is small in value and large in volume? We cannot cover everything now. Suppose there may be some Dyson tools. So how to value all these small parts and other things, but it is there in the books of accounts.
Okay. So my thought process is very clear, sir, that in case it is part of the books of accounts and if you are required to value the complete plant and machinery which belongs to somebody, which includes these tools and dies, and you have the photos, video recording of your physical verification, you have records of how you verified those machines were actually there or those parts were there. So the record keeping now is a must, sir. So in case you have records which say that you did physically verify those assets, then that is good enough. And you can have a video recording also these days, because your smartphone is now with everyone, sir. Even everyone's driver and maids have smartphones where they can do video recording. So we can, of course, have a record of, as valuers, we can at least keep a record of whatever we are seeing when we do a physical verification. and rather a good quality physical verification record in the form of photos and videos is encouraged by everyone, sir, including the clients also. So that is the way forward. If you have noted down in evaluation report that you saw those machines physically at that point in time, and you have shared your draft report with the person who is your client, maybe in case of a resolution plan, you will share it with somebody who is the resolution professional who is taking over the case. And if everyone is accepting your your draft report and all that, then it can also be assumed that these machines were there when you went for the physical verification. But at the same time, in case these machines were not there when you were there and you don't have any record of physical verification of any asset or most assets, then somebody can hold you negligent. That's my point of view. But in case you're able to show that, okay, I have physical records of photos and videos of 90% of my machines, and these are the only 10% that I don't have, then maybe you will get some leniency. Can't say, will be depending on case to case.
Okay, sir.
Then I have another question. So I have a question from Rajesh G, and Rajesh G had asked this question before we went for a break. He's asking for how we can get value from the market in case there is a new product. So my understanding is that yes, if there is a new product for which market is not able to give you the value, then you have to look at an alternative approach. So, but the question is, what is that alternative approach? Alternative approach is that you look for similar assets. So say, can I ask you what kind of product are you thinking of? Maybe you can give me an example of a product where you feel that it is new and one may not find a market comparable for the same. Maybe you can give me an example. So I don't have an example from Rajesh Ji. Rajesh Ji, maybe you can simply unmute yourself and then share what product you're talking about. Okay, moving forward now. So the procedures involved in preparation of valuation report will include all this. We've already discussed this. Any questions on this, please go ahead and ask me. Procedures involved in preparation. So RV should also include in the valuation report what all information provided. So affirmative statement that information provided and assumptions used by the management, others in developing projections have been appropriately reviewed, inquiries made regarding basis of key assumptions in context of business being valued in the industry economy, etc. An affirmative statement on the adequacy of information and time for carrying out the valuation. So these should be included in the valuation report so that these two things are confirmed by the valuer. The RV should mention any key factors which have a material impact on the valuation, including the size or number of assets or shares of the company, their materiality or significance, minority or majority holding, and changes on account of transaction, any impacts on controlling interest, diminution or augmentation therein, and marketability or lack of thereof. So all these can affect that can have a major impact on the valuation. Prevailing market conditions and government policy with respect to the asset. Then faulty structural designs or contamination must be looked into, and that should be like adjusted for. Caveats are warnings or cautions to the client, user, or services. Limitation is a restriction on the scope of RV's work, including inspection or investigation of the data available for analysis. A disclaimer is a statement intended to specify or delimit the scope of rights and obligations that may be exercised and enforced by parties in a legally recognized relationship. So it is a statement denying responsibility intended to prevent civil liability. So what can I say? What can anyone give me examples of these three things before we move forward? maybe you can repeat the same sentence in different manner and say that, okay, this becomes a caveat, this becomes a limitation. So if I say that I did not get the FAR, the fixed asset register, and I had a limitation in doing the valuation in absence of that fixed asset register. And in absence of that information, I have assumed that the plant and machinery belongs to dash, 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 dash period. And I say that I therefore will not be responsible in case the actual age of the machinery is different from what I have assumed. And I say that that the user of this valuation report should take caution or precaution in believing this valuation report to the extent of this assumption, or should verify this assumption before trusting this valuation report. So can I say that the first part that I talked about is a limitation, where I say that I am not able to, there is a restriction on my functioning. There is a restriction based on the information or documents available with me, and based on which I have no other option but to claim, say that I had a limitation. The second part was where I said that I disclaim my responsibility. I issue a disclaimer. I don't want to be responsible for this assumption that I've made. This assumption may be wrong. And the third part is, of course, where I say that I am issuing a warning or a caution that if something happens to, or something erroneous happens, where the decision goes waste, where the evaluation is not accurate because of this particular issue, then I need to warn or caution to other people. So these are, maybe this is one. I've attempted to make an example for all the three together. We will look further at other examples and then take it forward. I have a question from Ms. Raja. Asset valuation can be done by respective valuers, but who will do business valuation? So normally business valuation is done by SFA valuers. In my view, however, when you do a business valuation, and in case of a going concern valuation, because going concern valuation normally assumes that you will be looking at future cash flows, and based on those future cash flows, you'll be computing the present value of whatever you need to value. In rare circumstances, you will have some non-operating assets, assets which are not operating into or contributing into the profits of the firm. In those cases, you will need a specialist like a land and building valuer for a land and building asset, a plant and machinery valuer for a plant and machinery asset, to compute the values of those assets. Then moving forward, so this sentence is important, that while these are different connotations, but these are used in an interchangeable manner, as limitation or disclaimer by an RVE could be caveat for the user. So hence it is imperative that the users should be briefed, or they should be knowledgeable about this, and they should be familiarized about the limitations and all these things, so that they can make sure that the report is credible and reliable. Any caveats limiting condition or other disclaimers to the report must be clearly stated with appropriate specificity. So in the preparation of a valuation report, the RV shall not disclaim liability of his expertise for his duty of due care, right? So the due care is there, and that has to be said. The RV can't say that I don't have responsibility of due care, I can be negligent. No, that can't be said by the RP in the caveat limitations or disclaimers. The management remains liable for the correctness and veracity thereof. However, significant inputs provided to the RV by the management owner should be considered, investigated, and corroborated. In case where credibility of information supplied cannot be supported, consideration should be given as to whether or how such information is used. The RV does not make or calibrate the projections, but factors his response. So this is more important for SFA valuation, or for going concern valuations, I should say, where the RV is given the projections. So the projections are, it is understood that the projections will be given by the management, but they need to be checked. The assumptions in those in those need to be checked and verified. And if the RV disagrees with those future projections that the management has given to the registered valuer, in that case, the registered valuer is also free to modify those or replace those. The RV has the right to demand relevant information and basis of projections before commenting thereof. So it is the duty of the entity being valued to provide accurate information about the subject asset. So in a valuation report, the RV can state that the assumptions are statements of facts provided by the company, data provided by the company. You can say that the warning statement is necessary, as data provided by the company is often constituted to be part of the valuation report. And notwithstanding this, the RV has to carry out sufficient inspection, inquiry, computations, and analysis to ensure that valuation is properly supported. So all valuations are to be carried out in sufficient detail to comply with the requirements of due care. And we have already talked about it. And then keeping in view the business needs and circumstances in the interest of transparency, significant concerns regarding justification, the information, or the time availability to complete the valuation must be stated together with appropriate explanation and implications. So the effort, diligence, and level of expertise should be stated in the valuation report, so that the readers of the valuation report get to understand that the registered valuer who has done the valuation is having good knowledge to complete the valuation. These are some illustrative caveats, limitations, and disclaimers which are not to be used as per the guidelines. So this is a very, very important part. All of you are requested to concentrate in this part, where the first part is that the RV cannot be giving a disclaimer where he says that I have not tested applied any test of reasonability and due diligence on the financial projections that have been given by the management. So whatever management has given as future projections, the RV must check for due diligence of those things. Physical verification. So one can't give a disclaimer that I did not do physical verification where the engagement is for providing a liquidation value. Market related data. So RV giving disclaimer for the market relating data employed in this report, example, beta, discounting factor, comparable companies, comparable transactions. All these are market related data, but that is something that that the RV should not be disclaiming that I will simply pick this from somewhere and I will not talk about the trustworthiness of these inputs that are very, very crucial to the valuation process. Historical analysis. So the RV who says that I have not done any historical analysis of this company and I have simply believed the projections shared with me, there again the RV can easily say that cannot say that historical analysis has not been done by them. RV cannot say that I have only used one approach to the valuation and I have not even considered or talked about the other approaches. In case one has done market approach, then they should say that why have they not done income approach or cost approach. They can't remain silent about it. And in case they genuinely feel that the other method should be tried, then that method should certainly be tried. Appointing another expert. So the RV is appointing another expert who is junior to him or who is reporting to him, then that other expert is somebody who can who should be the report of that other expert should be made part of the valuation report. You can't just vanish it or say that, okay, I just used an expert and I'm not familiar with it, or I don't want to. The RV can't disclaim his responsibility with respect to one part of the valuation which he has delegated to somebody else. The control needs to be there. So desktop valuation, sir, is something which is more to do with SFA class, number one. Number two, in certain circumstances, land and building valuations. So this is a private message which has come in from one of the delegates today, wherein the question is that is the concept of desktop value valuation considered valid, and if yes, then physical verification hasn't been carried out, right? So the point is, desktop valuation is normally done where there are some there's reliance on the actual assets, physical assets is not too much, where maybe there is a going concern or something like that. There a desktop valuation is possible where you're on your desktop and you can make the valuation report without visiting the premises of the entity. In some circumstances like liquidation value, IBC is very clear that physical verification has to happen. So you can't be doing desktop valuation in those cases. In some cases like COVID scenarios, which we are kind of experiencing today, one can have a system where one can access those sites remotely on video and kind of do it over a video conference or a video call. So illustrative CLDs for all assets. So restrictions on use of valuation report. You can, as I think we got this input from somebody, that valuation reports can have a restriction on the purpose that they can be used for. A responsibility of the RV, that one can say that we owe a responsibility to only the authority client that has appointed me, and I don't want to be accountable to anyone else at all. That can be the case. Accuracy of information. So while our work has involved analysis of financial information and accounting records, our engagement does not include an audit. So you can say that I do not do an audit. I was only doing a valuation. You can't expect me to do an audit in the fee that I have received for doing a valuation. Achievability of the forecast results. You can talk about how the assurance which was provided with respect to future results, future cash flow projections is something that is there, and how the differences between actual and expected results may be material. Post-valuation date events. So what do you do with post-valuation date events? You kind of ignore them when you're making the report, right? You kind of say that, okay, I have considered all events up to the valuation date, and I have chosen not to do anything beyond the valuation date. So you should talk about that. You should say that the events which have happened post the valuation date have not been considered in the valuation. Range of value estimate. So there is a system that you can say that the valuation will range from say 5,000 rupees to 10,000 rupees. But in some cases you have to do a liquidation value, fair value, and then you have to give a straightforward value. You can't give a range. So in that case, the range will be something. The range is something then that needs to be a range of value estimate is something that needs to be forgotten in that case. So this is a disclaimer or a CLD that you can put in. No responsibility to actual price. You can say that the market price with respect to an asset is fluctuating based on the demand and supply movement in the industry, in the whole segment. So the actual market price achieved may be higher or lower. So you can say that, okay, I don't know what would be the actual price. My value is an estimate. My amount that I have stated is an estimate. You might get more, you might get less. I don't know. Reliance on the representations of owners, clients, their management, and other third parties. So the owner, the client owner and its management representatives warranted to us that the information they supplied was complete, accurate, and true, and correct to the best of their knowledge. So you can say that if I have got information from the company's management, then I have trusted that. I have used that. I have used that to find out what my evaluation will be. Right, that can be put in place, this kind of a CLD. No procedure performed to corroborate information taken from reliable external sources. So you can say that, no, I have not done anything to corroborate information from external sources. I have simply used information as it came to me. Compliance with relevant laws. So the idea is that in case there is a law that you need to follow, then those regional laws must be compliant, must be completed. And So the report, the CLD can go on like the report assumes that the company business asset complies fully with relevant laws, and you don't have to make sure, you have to kind of give a caveat that no, the company that we have valued is a legal entity. It has done all the legal compliances, and there will be no effect on the valuation in case some legal thing happens in future. Multiple factors affecting the valuation report. So the valuation report is tempered by exercise of judicious discretion by the RV, taking into account the relevant factors. So multiple factors can affect the valuation report. One can say that these multiple factors are, one can say that the multiple factors are affecting the valuation report, and that the RV has exercised discretion in using those, and you can say that how they will shape up in future is not a guarantee for the valuer. So the valuer says that, okay, the sales will increase by 10% every year. The management says that. The valuer checks and says, okay, this is believable. But say next year the sales increase only by 15%. What do you do? Like, I don't think you have a liability, right? You have to disclaim that liability. You may disclaim that liability. Future services, including but not limited to testimony or attendance in courts, you can say that my fee does not include a court fee or a visit fee. And if somebody asks me to come to a court and all that, that will be on their expenses. And yes, I will be charging this much in case my presence is necessary for that kind of a court appearance before a court and all that. Unavailability of information as on valuation date. So one can say that I did not get the financial statements of the company as on the valuation date. And therefore, I assume that maybe the last known or the most recent financial statements that I have, I will use them and I will close the chapter. So one can say that. Specific to intangible assets, so title deeds of the properties are specific. You can say that you have not verified the title deeds of the properties with the record of the registrar's office. One can say that our valuation is primarily from a business perspective and has not considered various legal and other corporate structures beyond the limited information available. Sketch plans and photographs, the RV has endeavored to visually identify the land boundaries and dimensions. However, he is not a surveyor, so you can say that yes, I have made some assumptions there, but I'm not. I've tried to measure the land, but I'm not a surveyor. You can say that. Latent effects affecting the valuation. So you can say that you have observed, you have visited the site, you have done the basic things that one is expected to do as a valuer to compute or to understand what effects are there in the property, and you have done the best job. But if there are any latent effects, maybe some crack, say maybe some weakness in the structure, maybe some problem with the structure, then those latent effects can be either ignored, or those latent effects affecting the valuation should then be there can be a disclaimer where we can say that the valuer does not assume any responsibility because of the latent defects. RV's observations are not a warranty, so you can say that yes, my report, whatever I've written, that has been information that has been shared with me. I don't give a warranty that in case you buy this house, then this house will be giving you this much money after a few years. No, I'm just looking at I'm just looking at you're not giving a warranty on information also. It's just reproducing the information given to you by the management, and then trying to make sense out of that. Hazardous conditions, there can be some industries, some places where where one can assume that no hazardous conditions or materials exist which could affect the subject business. But wherever they do, there of course there can be a different outlook there. Accuracy of architectural plans. So one can say that one has made some rough drawings, some architectural plans, and these are only accurate up to a point, and that is something that you can kind of discuss in your report. Validity of permits and licenses. So RV has assumed that the permits and licenses will be extended, or maybe they are having that kind of extension or time period up to which they will be valid. So if you have all that, then maybe this will be able to help you if there's any license or permit internationally registered which no longer remains valid, right? Continuation of subject business. So one can say that the business will continue normally without any disruption due to statutory or other internal occurrences. One can state that. Independent third party. So we have acted as an independent third party. We can say that we are not having any relationship with the company or with the appointing authority, and that the only consideration that we have got is our fee, and that is what we have worked for, and we are independent. We are not having any other interest with the person that we valued. Valuation assumption made by us. So we have made certain assumptions in relation to facts, conditions, or situations affecting the subject of or approach to this exercise. So one can say that yes, all these assumptions are a supposition taken to be true, and that you can say that if any of these assumptions prove to be incorrect, then our estimate of value will need to be reviewed. Some examples of land and building caveats. So one can say that no, we are not surveyors, so we did not do the detailed length and breadth of the land. We have done an approximate analysis and an approximate understanding of what would be the size of the land and building. Survey qualification. So if an RV was not provided a land survey report, the RV may state that the valuation is made on the basis that there is no encroachment by or upon the property. Town planning, resource management. So one can say that yes, in most circumstances, an RV will only make verbal inquiries of local authority or the state planning department as of the zoning or planning area of property. So in that case, in some locations, it is not possible to obtain these area certificates, and therefore one can give a disclaimer. Extent and nature of inquiries. One can say that you made zoning and development requirements. You did some research. You found out what is the rule, what are the rules and the zoning rules and all that rules. So you can look at that and then give a disclaimer about that. Tenancy details, you can say that you verified the physical property, maybe you did not, maybe you looked at the documents and you verified and confirmed that there was no tenancy with subordinate or a subordinate or a superior right, and then you can kind of value the property as if it was never leased, never tenanted. That can be done. Environmental contamination issues, you can say that there can be some contamination, some flooding, conservation, title claims and all that. And based on that, you can say that needful caveats need to be put in, saying that yes, this needs to be studied again by somebody. Somebody might need to rewrite it. So one can talk about environmental contamination issues also. Extent of valuations in respect of structural integrity. So you can say that, okay, I did an inspection, I did a visual inspection, I did some tuck on the building, and then I did not find any structural problems with the building, and that you can say that we have not we have access to the structural report of the property, so we don't have the access, nor do we have inspected or unexposed or inaccessible portions of the premises. So all that is that can be put it into the CLDs. Valuation under construction properties. So construction properties are unique in nature. They're long-term projects. They will have different scenarios of valuation based on the actual case. And then therefore you have to kind of put in this disclosure setting out all those details that are for under construction properties. So asset wise, going further, like for all asset classes, one can say that yes, I want to, there can be a CLD which talks about how information is evaluated, information that is provided to us by the company is evaluated through broad inquiry, analysis, and review, but there is no due diligence or audit. We have also already discussed about it. We can talk about how we are independent of the client company and have no client or no current or expected interest in the company or its assets. One can say that our report is meant for the purpose mentioned above and should not be used for purpose other than the purpose. I think already discussed the purpose part. Then we can say that there is no responsibility for legal matters, including but not limited to legal or title concerns, and that the assets and interests therein have been valued free and clear of any liens or encumbrances. One can say that. The physical condition of, so land and building cases, the physical condition, one can say that no engineering tests were done. It was a visual inspection, and based on that, one has understood the value of the building or the structure that was there on the land. Where a sketch plan is attached to the report, it does not report accurate architectural plans. So you can give a sketch, but then that sketch, if it is not accurate, you might like to qualify it because of the technology available. Unless otherwise stated as part of terms of engagement, the RV has not made a specific compliance survey or analysis of the various permits and licenses under the central, state, and local laws, regulations applicable to certain operation and use. Then the sale of subject property is assumed to be on an all cash basis. So you say that, okay, I will assume that the sale is on an on-cash basis, and the valuation is also in the currency that you're looking forward to value the goods or value the property or value the items on. Value arrives at the purpose and date. So there is no value which is without purpose and date, because value will change in case the date changes. Value may also change in case the purpose changes. The actual realizable value that is likely to be fetched upon sale of property under consideration shall entirely depend on the demand and supply of the same in the market at the time of sale. So plant and machinery point of view, one can say that the information they supplied was complete, accurate, and true and correct to the best of their knowledge, that the management has given the full information that was available with them. Based on that, one can say that one can give a disclaimer saying that concerning the financial data, operational data, maintenance schedule of plant and machinery, real estate investments and other investments in the intangible asset, except as specifically stated to the contrary in the report. So in no event shall be liable for any loss, damage, cost, or expenses arising anyway from fraudulent acts, misrepresentation, or willful default on part of the company, the directors, employee, or agents. So in case there is a misstatement, then the valuer is not taking any load on that through this CLD. Definition provides of value. So liquidation value could be significantly different from the fair value. Further, liquidation value is an orderly sale, can be very different from the liquidation value in case of a fire sale transaction. So all this is important for you to understand and make basic caveats make sense for you in the valuation report. So we have examined the assets described herein exclusively for the purpose of identification and description of the property. So you say that, okay, I have described all these assets only so that you can identify them easily, but you should not consider it as a warranty that whatever I've stated is right. So if somebody comes to the valuer and says that, okay, you wrote that your land and building is 1,000 square feet. I have measured it, it turns out to be, much lesser. So you can say that, okay, my valuation report is not a warranty. I am only also attempting to find out the information so that I can have a scientific basis of valuation. In the absence of a statement to the contrary, we assume that no hazardous conditions. I think we've discussed that, express no opinion as to how closely the annual actual results will correspond to. So we can say that again that the demand supply thing that we started a while back. So the same thing continues here. The sale is on all cash basis. Again, something we have discussed. The value is an estimated worth equivalent of an asset on a particular date based on certain facts and findings. Varies with its purpose. So the purpose can change, the circumstances can change, the facts can change. All this can change in such a manner that the value that is likely to be realized upon sale shall entirely depend on the demand and supply of the same from at the time of the sale. Coming to securities of financial assets. So while our work has involved an analysis of financial information and accounting records, our engagement does not include an audit. So you can say, I did not do an audit. I only trusted the financials given to me. And that you say that my report should be read in totality. One should not read my report in the small parts of my report always. The valuation of companies and businesses is not a precise science, and conclusions arrived at in many cases will be subjective and dependent on the exercise of individual judgment. The actual market price achieved may be higher or lower based on demand, supply factors, knowledge, negotiating ability, and motivation of the buyers and sellers and all that. So one must make sure that this CLD is in this manner such that it is compliant with the requirement. Analysis of such nature is necessary based on prevailing stock market. So you have to talk about what all things you've used, like you've used trends whenever you're doing SFA valuation, because mostly SFA valuation is all about future economic benefits. So that's what you're trying to estimate, right? The ultimate analysis will have to be tempered by the exercise of judicious discretion by the RV and judgment, taking into account the relevant factors. There will always be several factors, example, management capability, present and prospective competition, yield on comparable securities, market sentiment. All this can will always be there for the valuer to give a comment on. And using these and say that, okay, these are the factors which are not in the valuer's hand, or they are dependent on the future, and therefore that variance can come in the valuation, which is actually finalized in the data period. Unavailability of information as of the valuation date. So one can say that if the information was not available on valuation date, some historical financials were not available, etc., then that can be talked about. So coming to the part where the users, so some of you might also be users of valuation report in some way or the other. So there should always be a clarification on the scope of work, and CLDs should be limited ideally, but wherever the information is not available, that is where CLDs come into place. So that is what we need to rectify, or we need to bring in control, and that can be done only with support from the appointment authority. If the appointment authority is not able to give us anything that we can use to defend ourselves in case the valuation report is challenged at a future date, then we will have to put in the CLD, right? Otherwise, we can choose not to do that. Providing all possible information, documents of the valuer, providing detailed FAR, inventory list, providing follow-up, providing following facilities with coordination with the CD or otherwise to the valuer during physical verification, personal presence, or facilities to test, weigh intangible assets where feasible. So that was my presentation. I can take some questions. We still have 15 minutes to go. So request for questions from all the participants. If something that I discussed, or you have any questions on something that I discussed, something generic, so I can try and answer whatever questions you put forward to me. Any questions? Any further addition of an example of a CLD that you think will be meeting the guidelines of the IBPS circular and still can be given out, something that was missing here? Maybe somebody would like to contribute there. Sorry.
And ultimately the cash revenue what you are
Can you just repeat, because I think I lost your voice in the middle. Maybe you can repeat your question. I lost your voice. It was barely audible. Anyone else who got that question who can repeat it for me? Oh, I have a question from Bhavna. Can you explain SFA valuation in brief? How it is done, what points to be considered, what is the purpose of that? So, Bhavna ji, when we do an SFA valuation, we're looking at, we try to, so I'll quickly talk about the three approaches of valuation. What are the three approaches of valuation? Anyone who knows about the three approaches? Maybe you remember from whatever you studied so far. Cost approach, income approach, and market approach, right? Maybe all of you have already understood and discussed this extensively, that these are the three approaches. What economic principle are these three approaches based on? So what economic principle is income approach based on?
Is based on future projections of the industry, what we are going to get in future, that is to be accounted for, and the present value of those receipts.
So the economic concept is anticipation of benefits.
Yes.
Right, that is the economic principle. So today, in case you buy a house, what is the benefit that somebody can look at? If somebody wants to use income approach, can somebody say that if I want to buy my own house, I will no longer need to pay rent? Is that an economic benefit that he will have? Future benefit that they will have, right? Any other example of somebody incurring some expense and then saying that I will have some future benefit, or not incurring an expense and still saying that I will have a future economic benefit? So say I have a debtor who I need to realize ₹100 from, right? That's a future economic benefit where I might get some money from that debtor in future, right? What is the other approach in market approach? What is the economic principle behind market approach? Anyone?
In case of plant and machinery, we just go in the market and find out a similar equipment cost in the present market. So
the economic principle, sir, is that economic principle of market approach is that you will have price equilibrium in the market.
Yes.
Right. So you will like price equilibrium. If you go to the market and say that, okay, I want to buy a phone. Now, one phone will cost 20,000 rupees. The other phone will cost 25,000 rupees. In the long run, if that 25,000 rupee phone is not better than the 20,000 rupee phone, then either the 20,000 rupee phone will increase its prices or the 25,000 rupee phone will just go out of market. right? So there's a concept of price equilibrium. You go to a land and building, you say that, okay, this land and building seems to be good enough for a residential property. Okay, that's a check done. How do you value that? You say that, okay, what is the market approach? You try to find transactions all around that house, the neighbor's house, the neighbor's house, and try to find out values there. And once you have the values in hand, then you kind of start doing an economic using market approach. You will use the price equilibrium approach. In cost approach, you use the substitution approach, or the substitution approach, or the substitution economic principle applies, that if I don't want to, if I ever don't want to spend that money, what will I, how will I substitute that asset? So say you have a wooden staircase and you want to value it. So one of the ways of valuing it is saying that, okay, what will it cost to make a new one which is giving the same utility as this one? And once you know that, yes, the new one will cost an X rupees, maybe you can give a value to the one that you have, you already have, right? So some examples that I have given. So in that case, the income approach, where the future economic benefits or economic economic benefits, the present value of that is calculated in normal circumstances, and the key lies in expecting the future economic benefits with accuracy. That is what SFA valuation then does, whether it is tangible assets, intangible assets, inventory, and so on. Everything requires that. So I have a question from Mandar Acharya ji, where the question is that the guidelines issued by IBBI, any deviation allowed? So what deviation are we talking about, Mandar ji? Maybe I can understand from you, maybe you can speak out. I will understand what deviations are you looking at? What do you think will be the deviations that you will require? The IBBI circular or guidelines do not talk about, like, does give examples of CLDs, but they have nowhere say that these are the CLDs that you have to use. It's optional for you to use. It's also optional for you to amend those CLDs to your advantage, subject to a few things. One, you shouldn't be having a CLD which is part of the barred list. The 6 limitations and disclosures that I shared, which are not approved or which are not required to be put in by the IBBI. The second part is that IBBI does not perhaps want you to disclaim your liability altogether for any asset, for any valuation. So that's something that you can make a mark of. Maybe you can just speak out and I can understand what you have in mind when you talk about deviations.
Yeah, actually, I think you have answered it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone else? Thank you. Yeah.
In case we're carrying out a valuation and we state the realizable value of a certain property, are we allowed to also put in a disclaimer that this realizable value stands for a certain time period, and say the demand and supply of the market would change in the future, so then this value might not be attainable at a given future date?
So I had one of the examples, if you see, were also about this, where you said that, okay, I have given the valuation or given an estimate on the valuation date, and one can have a change in the valuation perspective, the market perspective overnight, right? So maybe, as I said, I was giving an example in the morning that a week back, there was almost no COVID, right? Nobody was fearful of that. Everyone was having a jolly way of life. Today, suddenly, within 2-3 days, everything has become bad. Maybe for Delhi, maybe for other states who had a bigger problem earlier, they were already facing all that since the last week. So businesses, the cash flows of businesses will suffer, right? If the business is not able to work, not able to open shop. Let's talk about a restaurant. If the restaurant, which was used to earn money because people used to come there for dining in, is closed now because the restaurant has been told to shut shop and only do takeaway, then that restaurant will have a problem. But the SFA valuer, what does the SFA valuer say? The SFA valuer wants to see that, okay, what will be the time taken by this new wave to subside, and he starts then calculating the estimated cash flows which will come into the company after that date.
Okay.
So the idea is that the valuation date is sacrosanct. Your valuation is true only on the valuation date. But in case nothing has changed since the valuation date and your valuation is still not accurate, then maybe you will have to introspect and see that why is my valuation not accurate? Did I take the wrong discount rate? Did I not anticipate the market sentiments at the time of valuation date? But if the market has changed totally, then nobody can stop that. Any other questions from anyone?
Sir, one question from my end.
Yes, sir.
Sir, in case of insolvency,
Mm-hmm.
is there any difference between market value and fair value?
In IBC, sir, the fair value is defined more or less like market value, wherein important principles are exactly like the definition of market value, which is stated in IVS. So the fair value is even in IVS, if you see the definition of fair value, it says that fair value is frequently used by statutes to give the definition of a specific value that they want. So IBC has given that. The difference between IBC's fair value definition versus IVS's market value definition is that fair value in IBC says that the date has to be, the valuation date has to be the CRP commencement date. That is the corporate insolvency resolution process commencement date.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in case of IVS, the market value is open. The market value says that the valuation date can be any valuation date that is fixed with the client. The second difference perhaps is that the second difference is not valuable, where IBC says that it's an estimate, whereas I guess IBC says that it is a value of the asset. So the difference is that the IBC valuation of fair value ignores all the liabilities because it only wants you to value the assets. Whereas in case of IVS, you're also required to value the liabilities at times, right? So the market value of an asset might require you to deduct the liabilities from the assets and then give a net value. But in IBC, the fair value is simply the asset value. You don't have to look at the liabilities.
Okay, sir. So in case of plant and machinery, we have to simply calculate the DRC for fair value.
DRC is one of the approaches. DRC is an approach. Depreciated replacement cost is the method that is normally used for plant and machinery valuation. Can you use some other method? Let me think. If the plant and machinery is totally in operation and it is actually a going concern that it is contributing to, one will be looking at maybe a DRC, but there the DRC should be adjusted for the biggest challenge in DRC, sir, that needs to be accurate is that the market value that you are estimating today for an asset, for a machinery that you already have, should be accurate assumptions. So the only error DRC people make is that they pick up the value from some document or the historical asset or the historical value is picked up rather than looking at the market scenario today.
Yes, sir.
That is the only hiccup in DRC. Apart from that, if you talk about plant and machinery,
Yes,
one can look at the other method of capitalizing the lease value. So in case there are certain plant and machineries which are popularly leased out, so one can say that, okay, what will be the lease value? In case I talk about vehicles, maybe a DRC will be an incorrect method of valuing vehicles. You would rather like to find like comparables. So today somebody tells you, okay, value a 2015 model Baleno.
Yes.
So you will simply go out and look for 2015 model Balenos and their sale prices in the recent past, and then come out with a value. You will not do a DRC, sir, because the market comparables are available.
Yes, sir. In that case, in case of vehicle, that is right, sir. But in case of, suppose we go for valuation of industry, and that industry is on solvency. So in that case, we don't have sufficient time to find out the market comparables, and we have to complete the valuation within 1 week. So in that case, I think what we should do, is there any way?
Databases are important, sir, and rather, like, of course, if you totally go by the book value, there is a big chance that you will have an error, right? You never know what kind of cost has been inflated in the books, what kind of extra expenses have been capitalized along with the main asset. The asset might only be 110 rupees, and 40 rupees which is added on that asset might be just interest cost, which you don't know. So in case if you today say that no, the value of today's replacement will also be 150, then maybe you're taking the wrong assumption. Similarly, obsolescence is something that you may not be able to research in a very short time. So plant and machinery evaluations do take time, and how you can cut time is with experience. So once you have done a valuation wherein you have come across maybe a lathe machine, and you have done some research on that lathe machine and how the machineries are available, what are the models available, what are the sizes available, what are the loads available, weightage available, and all that, and you have that database once, then maybe you can use that database for 6 more months, for 8 more months. And then once that period elapses, then you can look at regathering that data. Then what we do in our office is we also promote that you use your spare time to collect this data. So
Yes,
say
sir.
you want to, maybe have a list of machinery and overall machinery, and you can say that, okay, I already have, this database which I will use in future.
Yes, sir.
Possibilities, these are the possibilities.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you for this session, and thank you for the interactiveness that all those showed who did ask their questions and also participated in my questions. Over to you, Mehak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for today's session. I'd like to thank you and all the participants for joining in today. And we'll keep you updated of all the upcoming webinars in the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.